My name is Daniel, and I am 58 years old, and I never imagined that at this age, when most men slow down and hope for peace, I would be dragged into the darkest chapter of my life. I never imagined that the people I trusted, the people I supported, the people I stood beside through every storm would be the same people who would tear my world apart. I always thought betrayal hit hardest when you are young, when you are still learning how people can fail you, but I learned that betrayal in your later years cuts even deeper because you have less time left to rebuild what gets broken. I still remember the moment it all began, the moment everything in my chest twisted like a rope pulling tight. It started with one simple sentence from my sister-in-law, a sentence spoken so calmly, so smoothly, that it did not sound like anger, it sounded like the final nail in a long-hidden plan. She looked right at me with a smile that had no warmth, and said, "You are not part of this family anymore." I had spent years walking into that house, carrying gifts, fixing things, making repairs, listening to problems, and lifting spirits, yet in one breath, she erased all of it like it meant nothing. I was standing right in the middle of their living room, holding a folder I had brought with me, hoping for answers, but instead, her voice sliced through the air like a cold blade. The fireplace behind her flickered, and the shadows on her face made her look almost proud, almost relieved, as if she had spent years waiting to throw those words at me. I did not yell, I did not move, I did not even breathe for a moment. I just stood there, holding that folder tight enough that my knuckles turned pale. Everything inside me felt like it cracked at the same time. My heart, my trust, my patience, my belief that family, no matter how messy, still chooses each other. I felt all of it shatter inside my chest like glass falling off a shelf. She had always been difficult, always carrying herself like she held secret ownership of the entire family, but I never believed she could go this far. I always tried to give her grace, thinking maybe she was stressed, or maybe life had hardened her, or maybe she just struggled to let people in, but this time she crossed a line so sharp there was no way back. This was not frustration, this was not a bad day. This was something she had been waiting for a long time. She thought I would simply lower my head and walk out quietly like an unwanted guest. She thought that a man my age, a man who lived a quiet life, would not push back. She thought that years of supporting them had made me soft. She thought she had control of the entire room, of my brother, of the kids, of the story itself. She thought she had the upper hand, but she was wrong. She had no idea who I used to be before the world knocked me down years ago. She had no idea how many battles I had survived after losing my business, my partner, and half my savings in one brutal season of my life. She had no idea that I had rebuilt myself once before, and a man who has already survived the worst is not scared of facing another storm. She had no idea what I carried in that folder. She had no idea that behind my calm face I held more truth than she ever expected. She had no idea that I had begun noticing things long before she tried to throw me out. She had no idea how far I was willing to go when someone tried to erase me from a family I had poured myself into for years. If she wanted war, she had no clue I was ready to end it my way. Not with shouting, not with rage, but with quiet precision and truth sharp enough to break her lies apart one by one. But before I take you inside that confrontation, before I tell you about the moment she tried to push me out like a stranger, and the moment I opened that folder that would change everything for her and for my brother, let me take you back to where it truly began. Because this story did not start with anger. It did not start with conflict. It did not start with revenge. It started with love. It started with trust. It started with family. It started with small cracks, so silent I barely noticed them. It started with a slow whisper of betrayal that slipped through the years like a quiet shadow, until finally it stood in front of me fully grown, and by the time I finally heard it clearly, it was already too late. When I drove home that night, the weight on my chest felt heavier than anything I had carried in years. It was the same kind of heaviness I felt the day I watched the doors of my old business close for the last time. That moment years ago had left a permanent bruise on my spirit, and I never thought I would feel that same crushing pressure again. Yet here it was, sitting on me like a mountain. The world outside my truck windows passed by in slow motion, the streetlights glowing softly, the sidewalks empty, the houses quiet, but none of it felt familiar anymore. Nothing outside had changed, yet everything inside me had shifted so fast it felt like the ground beneath my life had tilted without warning. I pulled into my driveway and let the engine die, but I did not get out right away. I sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the dim porch light of my own house, a place that had always felt safe, a place where I could breathe, yet tonight even that light felt distant. My heart thudded slow and heavy. My breath felt uneven. It honestly felt like someone had taken a knife made from cold truth and pressed it straight into the softest part of my trust. The pain was not sharp, but deep, a deep ache that told me things had changed forever. It was not her words that broke me. People throw harsh words all the time, especially someone like Mel, who built her entire personality out of control and bitterness. It was not the sentence itself. It was what stood behind it. The part that cut was knowing my own brother, the man I had protected and guided and stood by since he was in diapers, had let her push me out without lifting a single finger to stop her. That was what shattered me. That was what made my chest feel like it was folding inward. Family was supposed to stand like a wall around you. You were supposed to lean on each other when life went dark. I always believed that no matter how messy things got, no matter how angry people became, no matter what mistakes were made, family fought for each other. But standing in that living room watching my brother stare at the floor while his wife erased me with a sentence, I realized the wall I believed in had already fallen, and I was the one crushed under it when I finally stepped out of the truck and walked. Inside my home, the place felt different. My house had never felt luxurious, but it had always felt like mine. Warm, simple, steady. But that night, the warmth was gone. The air felt colder, as if the betrayal had followed me through the door and settled in the corners. The chair I sat in every night after dinner suddenly felt harder, like it was made from stone. Even the silence felt different, sharper, louder, echoing every thought I was trying to outrun. I sat there letting the memories replay again and again. The kids who used to run into my arms, now sitting stiff like strangers who had been coached to fear me. My brother, who normally greeted me with a grin, standing frozen with guilt in his eyes. And Mel, standing there with her arms folded across her chest, chin tilted up like she had been waiting years to finally take me down. It made sense now, the small, cold comments, the subtle digs, the way she always positioned herself between me and the kids. She had been working up to this moment for a long time, but the longer I sat there, the less I felt broken. Something inside me began to move slow at first, like a quiet shift in the wind, then stronger. It was not wild anger. It was not mindless rage. It was something controlled, something steady, something that made me sit up straight. It rose inside me like a storm rolling slowly over the mountains, gathering power inch by inch. It was a different kind of anger, the kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of clouding them. The kind that makes you see clearly instead of blindly swinging in every direction. I stood up and walked to my kitchen table where the folder still sat. I opened it and spread everything out across the wood. Papers, receipts, texts, screenshots, printed statements, notes, dates, signatures, all the things I had gathered over the years without even realizing. I was preparing myself for a moment like this. At the time I kept them because something in my gut told me I should hold on to them, but I never guessed how important they would become. I organized every piece, slowly and carefully lining them up like pieces on a chessboard. Every date, every number, every name. I moved each page into place, and the more I laid out, the clearer the picture became. I was not losing my mind. I was not imagining things. The pattern was there, the truth was there, hiding quietly under layers of small excuses. Then, as I reached the bottom of the stack, I saw something tucked behind 2 sheets. A receipt. A small one, barely noticeable, like something someone tries to disguise by sliding it behind other papers. My name printed on it, but not a place I had ever been to, not a purchase I had ever made. I picked it up and held it closer, trying to remember anything that would make it make sense, but nothing came at first. I thought maybe it was something Ethan had asked me to cover years ago, but the date was wrong. It was from a time when he never asked me for anything. Then I remembered something. A school document from 2 years earlier. A moment so quick, I barely remembered it until now. Mel asking me to sign something saying she mixed up the forms and needed help to get the kids into a program. I trusted her and signed it. I did not think twice. Now, looking at that receipt in my hand, something cold crawled up my spine, slow, icy, unforgiving. That was only the first piece. Only the first drop of water leaking through a dam I had not even known existed. And suddenly, I knew with awful clarity that this was not an accident. This was not a mix-up. This was not confusion, I whispered. To myself, what else did she do? What else has my name been used? For what exactly has she been planning behind my backhand as that? Question echoed through the quiet room. I felt a new truth settling deep inside me. This was much bigger than one cruel sentence in a living room. This was much bigger than one fight. This was a betrayal years in the making, and I had only just begun to uncover it. The next morning came too fast, like the night had only blinked instead of passing. I woke up before the sun even touched the blinds, not because I felt rested, but because my mind had been running laps all night. My chest still carried that tight pull, like someone had tied a rope around my ribs and kept yanking it little by little. I lay there, staring at the ceiling for a while, hearing nothing but the ticking of the old clock on my wall, the same one I used to find comforting. But today, even the ticking sounded different, sharper, like a countdown. I finally got up and dragged myself to the kitchen. My hands were shaking a bit, not from fear, but from a kind of restless anger that refused to stay still. I made my coffee stronger than usual, the kind of strong that could wake up a man buried 6 feet under. When I sat to the table with that folder again, the one Mel thought she could intimidate me into dropping, I realized something had changed inside me overnight. I wasn't sifting through papers anymore. I was hunting. I opened my laptop and took a deep breath as the screen lit up my face. I began checking everything: old accounts, financial statements, every email I hadn't bothered to open in months. At first it was just routine, the kind of checking you do when trying to calm your paranoia. But then I found something small, too small. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were already suspicious. A subscription membership, 18 months old, under my name, but not connected to my address. It was linked to theirs. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the facts sink in like slow poison. It wasn't enough to accuse anyone of anything, not yet. People make mistakes. People click the wrong button. People mix things up. At least that's what I told myself for about 3 seconds. But then, I found another one. A medical payment request from a clinic I'd never set foot in. Again my name. My information, but the address was theirs. Their home. Their mailbox. Their benefit. My heart dropped so fast, it felt like hitting cold water. And then another emotion rose right behind it. Hot, sharp, steady. The kind of anger that doesn't explode. The kind that builds. I clicked deeper. Another notification. A loan inquiry. Denied, but attempted. Under my name. Under my identity. Using details only someone close to me would know. Someone who knew my past. Someone who had access to old documents when I trusted them years ago. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. This was deliberate. This was betrayal dressed as family. I pushed back from the table, hard enough that the chair scraped against the tile like a scream. I ran both hands over my face and felt the weight of something I had ignored for far too long. The signs were always there, scattered like breadcrumbs. But I had been so desperate to hold on to family that I convinced myself to overlook what should have been obvious. Mel wasn't careless. She wasn't confused. She was calculated. She had been using my name, my information, my history, my identity, and she had been doing it behind my back for more than a year. She wasn't just trying to shove me out of the family. She was using me first, like a resource, like a stepping stone, like a man whose life she could tap into whenever she needed something and then discard the moment he stopped being useful. And my brother, my own brother, either knew or pretended not to notice. Both options hurt the same. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the folder spread across the table. For the first time, the papers didn't look like random documents. They looked like evidence pieces of a truth I had refused to accept until now. Every date, every payment, every signature that wasn't mine. It all formed a pattern, a web, a trap, they thought. I was too old or too soft or too alone to ever escape from. But here's the thing. A man who has already lost everything once doesn't fear loss anymore. I built a business from nothing once in my life. I watched it crumble because I trusted the wrong people. I picked myself back up, and here I was, a gun older maybe, but sharper, wiser, more patient. And this time, I wasn't walking away quietly. I stared at the screen and felt something shift inside me, something heavy but powerful. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was resolve. Quiet, cold, unbreakable resolve. They thought they were taking advantage of a weak man. They forgot I survived worse storms. They forgot I rebuilt stronger, and now I finally saw the full picture, and I was ready to act. Days began passing in a way that didn't feel real, like time itself had taken on a strange thickness. I would wake up every morning thinking maybe the anger would fade, maybe the shock would soften, maybe I would feel normal again. But it never did. Instead, every sunrise brought another small memory, another loose thread, another clue that made everything unravel a little more. I couldn't let it go. I didn't know how to let it go. It was like once the curtain had been pulled back, I could never unsee what was behind it. And the more I examined the pieces, the more the pattern revealed itself, slow and ugly. For every small financial setback they experienced lost hours at work. An unexpected bill, one of their kids needing something under my name, suddenly appeared right after. A charge that never belonged to me. A form submitted in my name. A phone call from a company I never dealt with. Each thing tiny enough on its own to be ignored. But when I lined them up, when I looked at them side by side, they created a picture that made my stomach twist in ways I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't random. It was intentional. I started remembering little things, moments I had brushed aside, comments that didn't make sense at the time but suddenly felt horrifyingly clear. I thought back to 4 years ago, Ethan standing in my living room, holding out a stack of papers with that polite smile he always used when he needed something. He'd said it was for a school trip. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my nephew, my brother's son, so I signed it without reading it carefully. Back then, it didn't seem like a big deal. Just helping family. Just being the uncle everyone knew would show up when needed. But now, sitting there with the weight of their betrayal fresh in my chest, I replayed that moment again and again. How quickly he handed me the pen. How he seemed oddly relieved when I didn't ask questions. How Mel watched from the hallway with that little smirk she always tried to hide behind fake sweetness. What did I sign? What did I allow? What had they used my name for long before I even realized it? That question began haunting me. Every night I found myself sitting alone in my living room, the folder open on the coffee table like a wound that refused to close. The house was silent, but my mind buzzed loud enough to drown out the quiet. Sometimes my hand would shake as I turned over new documents. Sometimes my jaw hurt because I was clenching it without realizing. And then, one night later than I should have been awake, long after the street outside had gone dark, I said something out loud without meaning to. The words slipped from my mouth like a truth I had tried to avoid but could no longer deny. This is bigger than I thought. My own voice echoed in the room, bouncing off the empty walls like a warning. It sounded older than I expected. Tired, but not weak. Not anymore. It was the voice of a man who had finally stopped pretending everything was okay. I sat there for a long time with those words hanging in the air. My heart beat slow and heavy, each thump a reminder of how deep this betrayal had gone. It wasn't just Mel. It wasn't just careless mistakes. This was a network of small lies, small thefts, small twists of trust that had grown into something large enough to choke me. And that was the moment, the exact moment something inside me hardened. Not anger, not revenge. Something deeper, something older, something a man only develops after being brought to his knees. More than once in his life, I made a decision. I was going to dig deeper, much deeper. I was going to uncover every hidden thing, every forged signature, every misused document, every time my name had been dragged into something without my consent. I wasn't going to accept apologies or excuses or tears or guilt trips. I wasn't going to let them twist the story or play innocent, and if no, when I found what I suspected. I wasn't going to let them walk over me again, not at this age, not after everything I had given them, not after sacrificing time, money, energy, and years of support they took without hesitation, not after standing beside them through their messes, their problems, their struggles, not after being told, by a woman who had used me like a spare wallet, that I was no longer part of a family I helped hold together that night. Staring at the scattered papers, I felt something settle inside me. I wasn't just betrayed, I was awakened, and whatever happened next, I knew one thing clearly: they had just pushed the wrong man for the last time. The more proof I gathered, the more I realized I couldn't let emotions lead the way. If I walked into their house full of anger, Mel would twist the entire situation with that smooth, practiced tone she used whenever she needed to pretend she was the victim. She would talk fast and loud and interrupt me every time I tried to explain. She would cry the kind of tears that were more performance than pain. Ethan would stand there frozen, like he always did when things got tense with her, shoulders tight, eyes darting everywhere except toward me. And the kids would watch with wide, scared eyes, and I would look like the man who came to tear a family apart. I knew that scene because I had watched versions of it play out before when Mel fought with her own sister. She was a master at turning truth into chaos, so I needed something smarter, something controlled, something she couldn't spin to her advantage. That is when I thought about Sam, my old friend from way back. He was a retired cop now, but he carried a lifetime of experience with him. He was the kind of man who had seen every kind of human behavior, from the best to the worst, and he always knew when someone was playing a dirty game. I trusted him more than anyone because he had been there for me during the hardest years of my life. He never judged, never pushed, never belittled. He just showed up when I needed help and stayed until I stood on my feet again. I called him that same evening. My voice must have sounded off because the first thing he asked was if I was all right. I told him it was complicated. He said, "Come over." No hesitation, no questions. Just come over. When I arrived at his place, he already had the porch light on and 2 chairs waiting on the back deck. Sam always believed serious conversations were better outdoors, where the air was fresh and the walls couldn't hold your thoughts hostage. I brought the folder with me. The same folder Mel had seen in my hands the night she told me I was no longer part of her family. Sam poured us coffee and waited patiently while I pulled everything out. For a while, the only sound was the paper shifting in the light breeze. He went through every document, slowly, methodically, the way an experienced officer reviews a case file. He read everything twice, sometimes 3 times. His face stayed calm, but I could see the change happening in his eyes. The deeper he read, the more serious he became. When he finally closed the folder, he didn't speak right away. He pushed it back toward me with both hands, leaned back in his chair, and took a long, thoughtful breath. Then he said words that felt like a punch to the chest because they confirmed what I'd been trying not to believe. "Don, this is not small. This is a pattern, and you need to protect yourself." Hearing it from him made everything heavier but clearer. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't misinterpreting anything. What I had was not a misunderstanding. It was not an honest mistake. It was a trail of actions stacked on top of one another, each one using my trust to get something they wanted. Sam spent the next hour explaining what I needed to do. Step by step, calm and steady. He told me what records to print and how to store them. He told me which documents should stay hidden and which ones I could safely present if things escalated. He explained how people like Mel operate, how they rely on confusion, emotion, and control to bend situations in their favor. He knew her type all too well. Smart socially, but reckless legally. Charming on the surface, but careless underneath. the kind of person who believed consequences were for other people. He helped me build a clean timeline from the earliest suspicious moment to the most recent one. I watched him write dates in his neat small handwriting, connecting each one with a line that made everything feel colder and more real. He asked questions I didn't think to ask myself. He spotted patterns that I had overlooked because I was too close to the situation. He made me see the whole picture instead of the scattered pieces. By the time we finished, I had a wall of truth strong enough to stand on its own without any emotional explanation. It was plain. It was factual. It could not be dismissed as confusion or carelessness or family misunderstanding. It was exactly what it was. A record of betrayal carried out over years by people who smiled in my face while using my name behind my back. When the final page was set aside, Sam looked at me and said something I had not felt in a long time. "Dan, you are not powerless. You just forgot how strong you are." Those words stayed with me even after I drove home. They echoed in my chest every time. I opened the folder again and went through the carefully organized documents he helped me structure. And when I stood in front of the mirror later that night, looking at my own tired reflection, something inside me shifted. I no longer saw the man who had been blindsided and pushed aside. I no longer saw the uncle who tried to keep peace even when it cost him everything. I no longer saw the man Mel expected to stay quiet because he was older and lived alone. I saw a man who finally woke up. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I had to return to that house, not as the broken relative they thought they could dismiss, but as a man who carried truth with him, a man who had done his homework, a man who had the facts in hand and the resolve to face whatever storm came next. I had to confront them with everything I knew and everything they never expected me to discover. And this time, I would not walk in with my heart on my sleeve. This time, I would walk in ready to speak clearly, ready to stand firm, ready to show them who I really was beneath all the years of quiet, support, and easy forgiveness. I was going back to that house, but I was not going back as the same man who had walked out of it. I was going back as someone who knew the truth, and I was ready to let that truth speak louder than their lies. I chose a Sunday afternoon for a reason. Sundays were always there, slow family days, the kind where the noise from inside the house carried all the way to the sidewalk and the smell of a home. Cooked meal floated through the air. For years I had been part of those afternoons. Birthdays, holidays, lazy weekends. I had parked in that driveway so many times it felt like muscle memory, like my truck just knew where it belonged. But this time when I turned into the same driveway, the feeling was nothing like before. The house looked the same, but it no longer felt like a second home. It felt like enemy territory, a place where the people inside smiled at me for years while slowly pulling threads from my life without me noticing. My stomach tightened as I stepped out of the truck, but there was something else inside me too. A calmness I had not felt in years. A steadiness that came from knowing I was walking back in with truth as my shield, instead of blind trust. The air was quiet in that strange, tense way that happens right before a storm. I walked up to the door and knocked firmly. Not loud enough to start a fight, not timid enough to show fear, just steady. When the door opened, Ethan stood there and the look on his face hit me harder than any insult. His eyes widened like he had seen a ghost. His shoulders dropped as if the air had been knocked out of him. Behind him stood Mel with her arms crossed tight over her chest, that usual stance she used when she was ready to pounce. She opened her mouth, to deliver the same line she had used before. The line she had been waiting to say again because she thought it gave her power. She said it almost immediately. "You are not part of this family." But this time something was different. Her voice didn't come out smooth and confident. It shook, just a little, but enough for me to catch it. Enough to show me she knew something was coming, something she could not control. Her eyes flicked down at the folder in my hand, and I saw the first crack appear in her armor. Before she could say anything more, I stepped inside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I just moved forward with the calm certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to reveal. I walked straight to the dining table like I had done 1,000 times before when I brought gifts for the kids or helped them with homework, or sat there after long days trying to keep peace between family members who didn't realize how much strain they put on the people around them. I placed the folder on the table slowly and deliberately. The sound it made was small but powerful, like a gavel hitting wood. Ethan stood frozen near the doorway and Mel stayed by the wall, her arms no longer crossed but hanging stiff at her sides. I turned to both of them and said in a calm voice that surprised even me, "I am not here to argue. I am not here to yell. I am here to show you something, and you will listen because this is not a joke." The moment the words left my mouth, I saw another shift in Mel's expression. She let out a laugh, but it wasn't her usual mocking one. It was quick, shaky, forced. The kind of laugh someone makes when they feel the walls closing in and they don't know where to run. She looked at Ethan as if expecting him to jump in, but he just stared at the folder like it was a bomb waiting to explode. I opened it slowly. I didn't toss papers around or try to dramatic it up. I simply laid everything out piece by piece. Receipts with my name but their address. Forms with their handwriting but my signature. Loan attempts traced back to accounts tied to their home. Bills mailed to my place for services I never used. Names, dates, timelines, connections, all lined up in front of them like a puzzle that finally revealed the image underneath. As I laid each piece down, I watched Mel's face lose its color. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, like someone drained her from the inside out. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing quickened. She reached for the back of the chair as if she needed support but didn't want to show weakness. Ethan kept swallowing hard, his Adam's apple moving up and down like he wanted to speak. But fear glued every word in his throat. I spoke calmly as I explained each item. I told them the dates. I told them what had been attempted. I told them what was found. I told them what I knew and how long it had been happening. They didn't interrupt. They didn't argue. They didn't deny. They just listened with the shocked silence of people who realized the person they underestimated had been watching more closely than they ever imagined. When I finished laying out the last document, I stepped back and looked directly at both of them. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking in slow, heavy beats. Then I said something I had been carrying inside me since the day they pushed me out. "You tried to erase me. You tried to take what was mine. You tried to use me until there was nothing left. But you forgot something important. I kept every piece of myself safe." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Ethan's eyes filled with a kind of regret I had never seen on him before. Mel blinked fast, her eyes watering not from sadness, but from fear. Real fear, for the first time since I had known her. And in that moment I felt something powerful inside me. Not victory, not revenge, just strength. The strength of a man who walked into the lion's den and walked out of the shadows he had let himself live in. For too long, this was the moment everything began to shift, and none of them were ready for what would come next. The moment Mel's mouth opened, I could already see the shape of the lies forming behind her lips. She didn't even breathe before the excuses began pouring out fast, frantic, messy, like someone trying to plug holes in a sinking ship with bare hands. She denied everything at first, shaking her head so hard her earrings rattled. "That's not what happened. Those papers don't prove anything. You misunderstood. This isn't what it looks like." Her voice climbed with every sentence until it was thin and stretched like it might snap. Then she shifted. Suddenly it was stress. Stress from work. Stress from bills. Stress from raising kids. Stress from being a wife. Stress from dealing with life. She threw the blame around like confetti at a parade. It was the kids. They kept asking for things. I was overwhelmed. It was ether he never handled. Stuff you know how he is. It was you. You always helped too much, so I just assumed it was fine. That one made the room go silent. The way she said it, like my kindness had been a weapon she used freely, without guilt. Like I was the one who put the idea in her head that stealing from me, using my name, trying to bury me under her mistakes, was somehow acceptable. But I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let anger control the air. I stayed steady, grounded, because years of pain had carved something sharp inside me, not raged clarity, a clarity so bright it made every truth stand out like it was glowing. I answered her excuses with facts. I matched her lies with proof. Refused to let her spin another story. Every time she stumbled, Ethan's eyes flicked between us, guilt swimming in his expression, like he'd been drowning in it long before I walked in. His shoulders kept sinking lower, as if he was finally realizing the weight he had allowed to grow inside this house. But the moment that changed everything, the moment that broke the room open, came from someone none of us expected. The oldest kid, my niece. She had been standing back near the hallway, arms hugged around herself, watching like she was witnessing something she'd always suspected but never had words for. Her eyes were red, glossy, trembling not from anger, but from fear, from confusion, from truth banging on the door she had been forced to keep shut. She stepped forward, slow, careful, like the floor might collapse, and when she spoke, her voice shook with a kind of pain that didn't belong in a child's eyes. "Mum, you told us to stay away from Uncle Dan," she whispered. "You said he was dangerous." My heart stopped. It actually stopped. Not a metaphor, not dramatics, a real, physical jolt that felt like someone grabbed my chest and squeezed. Dangerous. That word hung in the air like smoke, choking, impossible to ignore. Dangerous, me, the man who bought her first bike with the purple ribbons she loved. The man who spent hours helping her learn math because she hated being the only kid struggling. The man who held her when thunder made the windows shake and she cried into my shoulder. The man who showed up for soccer games, school plays, birthdays, every moment a real father figure is supposed to show up for, even when her own father was too busy or too tired. Dangerous. It hit me harder than any document I brought, harder than the financial betrayal, harder than the lies. This wasn't just stealing money or using my name to cover her messes. This was deeper. Darker, darker, far. More cruel, it was character assassination. A systematic destruction of who I was in their eyes. Mel hadn't just tried to erase me, she had rewritten me into a monster. And hearing my niece say it, hearing how scared she sounded, how confused she was, it cracked something in me so old and so fragile I hadn't realized it still had the power to break. I turned to Mel slowly. She wouldn't look at me now. She couldn't. Her eyes darted everywhere at the floor, the wall, the papers, Ethan anywhere, but at the truth she had created, piece by piece. More truth spilled from the kid stopped like stones falling out of a collapsing wall, like secrets finally escaping a cage. Mum said you were unstable. Mom said you might take us away. Mom said you needed our money. Mom said you were jealous of our family. Mom said not to trust you. Mom said to ignore you. Mom said to delete your messages. Mum said you didn't love us. Every sentence was a stab, slow, painful, deliberate. Years of normal family moments, now twisted into something ugly behind my back. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't just selfishness. This wasn't a mistake. This was warfare of the soul. A deep, cold attempt to destroy my place in their lives, to erase every memory I ever built with them, to turn me into a shadow they feared instead of someone they loved. And as the truth kept unraveling, Mel's confidence, the arrogance she always carried, like a crown fell apart. Her face lost all its color. Her hands shook, her lips trembled, because she knew. She finally knew. Everything she built on lies was collapsing right there in her own living room, and I stood in the center of it, calm, quiet, unmoved, because, for the first time in years, the truth wasn't just mine. It was visible, it was undeniable, it was loud, and it was destroying the lies. She lived on. The unraveling had finally begun.
The room felt heavy, like something thick and invisible had wrapped itself around all of us. The lies had stopped, the excuses had died out. The truth, raw and unfiltered, was sitting in the middle of the living room like a burning spotlight no one could escape. For a long moment, no one spoke. Not Mel, not the kids, not even me. Then from the corner of the room, barely above a whisper, I heard Ethan's voice. At first I thought I imagined it, because it sounded so small, so fragile, like a man cracking under the weight of something he had been holding for far too long. But then he spoke again, a little louder, and I realized he wasn't talking to anyone else. He was talking to me. He said my name, but it came out broken. His face was pale, his eyes red, his body slumped as if someone had punched the truth out of him. For years I saw him as stable, quiet, reliable, the peacekeeper of the family, the man who rarely raised his voice. But in that moment, I didn't see peace. I saw fear. Fear that had lived inside him so long it had carved him into someone he was. I knew, he finally admitted, voice trembling like a man confessing a crime. I knew about the loan attempt. The words hit the air like a heavy stone hitting water, deep, echoing, impossible to ignore. He looked at the folder, at the documents spread across the table, at the evidence of everything that had been done behind my back. His jaw clenched. His fingers shook. He squeezed his hands together like he was trying to stop them from falling apart. I didn't sign anything, he said quickly, but I knew she did it. I knew she tried using your name. He swallowed hard. The sound of it cracked through the silence, like a twig snapping. I thought you'd be fine. Mel said you wouldn't even notice. She said you always helped, so this was nothing to you. I closed my eyes for a moment. That line again. The weapon she used, my willingness to help, my loyalty, turned against me like a knife. He continued, voice shaking harder now. I should have stopped it. I should have said something. I should have told you. His breath caught. But I didn't, because I was scared. Fear. That was the word that held him hostage. He said it again, quieter, almost ashamed. I've been scared of confronting her for years. And right then, I understood. He didn't stay silent because he agreed with her. He didn't stay silent because he didn't love me. He stayed silent because he lived in a prison he didn't even build, but one he never fought to escape. Fear ruled his life. Fear guided his decisions. Fear destroyed our relationship. Fear cost me my place in their home, in their hearts, in their story. He lowered his head, and for the first time in 15 years, Ethan, my closest friend, my brother, looked like a stranger standing in his own home. The room turned colder after that. Nobody moved. Not even the kids. Mel didn't speak. She didn't fight. She didn't breathe. Everyone stood frozen in the ruins of their own choices. My heartbeat echoed in my ears like footsteps walking away long before I ever stood up. I took a slow breath and looked at each of them, one by one. At the kids, whose eyes were filled with confusion and hurt because they had been fed lies dressed as truth. At Ethan, whose shoulders sagged like a man who finally realized the cost of silence. At Mel, whose face had collapsed into fear, anger, guilt, and panic all at once. And then I spoke, not loud, not angry, not shaking. Just real. Just honest. Just done. Family, I said softly, is supposed to protect each other. My voice echoed through the house, the same house I once walked into without knocking, the same house where I spent holidays, birthdays, dinners, celebrations. The same house where I once felt safe. Family isn't supposed to use each other. Mel flinched. Family isn't supposed to lie to each other. Ethan closed his eyes. Family isn't supposed to erase someone from the picture just because it's convenient. The kids stared at the floor. I stepped back from the table, from the documents, from the weight of everything I had carried alone. You told me, I said finally, that I wasn't part of this family. My chest tightened, not from pain, but from clarity, a clarity that burned brighter than all the betrayal combined. But the truth is, I let the silence fill the room, heavy and final. You are not the family I thought you were. The house didn't just fall silent. It collapsed into silence. A silence that said everything no one else had the courage to speak. And standing there, I felt something inside me break. Not because I lost them, but because I finally understood I never truly had them. This was the final break. The moment the story they built shattered. The moment the truth stood alone. The moment I walked away, not bitter, not angry, just free.